And right now, we want to turn to Gary Cohn. President Donald Trump is planning to sign an executive order today to scale back the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial overhaul law. He hinted at his plans during a meeting this week with small business owners. Listen to this.
It's almost impossible now to start a small business, and it's virtually impossible to expand your existing business because of regulations. And because if the banks don't loan you money, you know, Dodd-Frank is a disaster. We're going to be doing a big number of Dodd-Frank.
Joining me right now in a First on Fox interview is White House National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn. Gary, it's nice to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Maria.
Congratulations on your leadership. You just heard what Bob Hugin said about you. Very impressed in what you've been able to do in these short 2 weeks. President Trump is promising to roll back regulation with an executive order today on Dodd-Frank. What are you expecting to achieve?
Well, look, Maria, as you've heard from your prior guest, we've met with over 50 business leaders and CEOs. We're going to continue to meet with a wide group of CEOs today. And the first thing we're hearing from many of these CEOs is the biggest hindrance to growth and the biggest hindrance to job creation is regulation in this country. So as we sit here and start implementing our policy, the first thing that we are going to attack is regulation over regulation. It's not just in the financial markets, it's in all markets. So today you're going to start seeing the beginning of some of our executive actions to roll back regulation in the financial services market.
Where are the most onerous regulations, Gary? Because I know ever since Dodd-Frank was signed into law, we were talking about the fact that they couldn't even explain what some of them, you know, the regulations were. They couldn't even write it. How do you execute if you can't even write it? So where's the most onerous that you think need to roll back?
Maria, there's many onerous parts. The biggest thing that we have to fix is that we have to get the United States banking system working again. We need to make capital available for small and medium-sized businesses and for entrepreneurs. Today, banks do not lend money to companies. Banks are forced to hoard money because they're forced to hoard capital and they can't take any risk. We need to get banks back in the lending business. That's our #1 objective.
So over the last several years, you're saying small and mid-cap banks were not lending the way that they could have because they were shackled by these new rules.
Maria, I'm saying all banks have been shackled by these rules. Big banks, small banks, medium-sized banks. All banks have been under such regulatory scrutiny where they've been forced to literally build capital and build capital. And instead of lending capital into their clients and allowing their clients to grow their businesses and hire people and create jobs, they've been taking those reserves and they've been taking that capital and hoarding it to meet the regulatory requirements and pay for additional regulation.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about Donald Trump's policies is the fact that he's so focused on growth. He puts this growth umbrella and he tries to figure out how to get economic growth from all sides, whether it's lower taxes or a rollback of regulation. So, Gary, I ask you, how significant do you believe this rollback in regs is going to be for economic growth?
We think it's going to be very significant. You know, when we're talking to the groups of CEOs that we've brought in, and I'm sure we'll hear the same thing today from the CEOs coming to the White House, is there are 2 or 3 major issues that are prohibiting our businesses in America from growing and growing at a much faster speed. #1 is regulation. #2 is tax policy, and #3 is infrastructure. Those happen to be the president's top 3 agenda items domestically.
I want to ask you about infrastructure because I know you've been working on it a lot in your time at the White House. But, of course, tax reform is also real important to viewers. And I feel like House Speaker Paul Ryan saying that Republican lawmakers want to push through their tax reform bill into the spring has disappointed some because they're focused instead on health care. President Trump has called for slashing the corporate tax rate to 15%, down from 35%. Gary, how do you plan to get that bill passed, and when is a realistic time to expect real tax reform, Gary?
So, Maria, look, we're working on all 3 of these issues. We're working on jobs, taxes, infrastructure, regulation. We're working on them all simultaneously. I was up on the Hill yesterday with Speaker Ryan and his team and other members of the House and Senate working on taxes. We are trying to push that as quickly as possible. Yes, there is a natural order to how we're going to do things. We've got to clear up some parts of Obamacare and health care before we can do taxes, but we're not waiting to get health care done. We're working on taxes simultaneously. So we're going to push these things through as quickly as we possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, look, some people might argue that repealing and replacing Obamacare is the biggest tax cut of all, by the way. I mean, some people might say that that's going to help the economy more than other things anyway. But as it relates specifically to tax reform, do you think, Gary, that we will understand what the reform package looks like in the first 200 days and then perhaps look toward later in the year, second half of the year, to actually see the implementation?
Yeah, Maria, look, I don't know if it'll be 200 days, 100 days, 300 days. What I do know is we're all working to a very common objective, and everyone agrees on what the objective is. The objective is lower corporate taxes as a starting point, and then dealing with personal income taxes, especially for the lower earners. We're not earners. We're not spending a lot of time with the high earners. And when you have to balance, the pass-through businesses in the middle. So we are spending an enormous amount of time trying to drive down corporate taxes. And every one of these CEOs we have met with, as I said, it's been their second most important topic, is the tax rate, making America competitive in tax rates. If you look around the world today, the OECD tax rate is 23% on average. GDP adjusted, it's about 26%. We're 35%. We have to get competitive with the rest of the world on taxes.
Yeah, I mean